At the beginning of the film, there is a dashing man with a hat and sunglasses, and he is wearing a soldier's jacket. The man was contemplating in his car. Shortly after, he got out of the car and then walked into an office. This man's name is Eddie Deacon. He is a former Marine Corps security captain who has served on 3 tours in Iraq. At least, that's what he told the woman who was writing his profile. Currently, Eddie is looking for a job as he has been unemployed for a year. Firmly, he asked the woman to list the minimum wage so he could get a job immediately. Eddie told the woman that his life is getting worse now. He said that his wife and daughter live far away from him, while his car is also being damaged, so he really needs a job to be able to pay for it all. But the woman didn't seem to care about Eddie. She just took her glass and drank casually. Feeling confused, Eddie stepped out of the office towards his car. But not long after, the woman called him and handed him a paper containing a job description for him. Even though the working hours were annoying and the place was quite far away, Eddie still accepted the job happily. Eddie smiled after he finally managed to get a job. Elsewhere, U.S. Marshal troops in 3 black SUVs and fully armed came out of the headquarters in convoy transporting a little girl named Jamie, who will testify in court. She is the main witness in an organized crime trial. While crossing the desert, they were drenched in heavy rain on their way to Cedar City, which was still an hour away. When one of the marshals was on the phone, the signal was suddenly lost. It turned out that they were followed by 2 strange cars, and when trying to communicate with the soldiers in the other car, they still lost signal. The U.S. Marshal started to feel suspicious, and after that a sudden incident occurred. After one car overturned, a group of mercenaries got out of the car and started shooting at the marshals. The marshals tried to fight back, but the commander asked Jamie to run into the forest and not stop until she met someone who wanted to help her. None of the U.S. Marshal's troops survived. These mercenaries took out brooms and started clearing the path so as not to leave any evidence behind. When it rained heavily, Eddie was sitting alone in his hotel room. He held the phone and caught his breath. It turned out that he was gathering courage to call his wife. Eddie informed his wife that he had found a job. At that time, Eddie's wife sounded worried, but Eddie tried to calm her down. His wife said that their daughter, Sylvia, always asked how her father was doing. Hearing that, Eddie sent his daughter a love greeting before he hung up the phone. After that, Eddie returned to contemplation. Even though the rain had not stopped, Eddie still came to his new workplace. Seeing that the door was still locked, he decided to wait in front of the building. But not long after, a man came up to Eddie and asked him the purpose of his arrival. After seeing the job paper that was handed to him, the man named Vance invited Eddie to enter the building. Vance showed Eddie their workplace, and it turned out that this building was a mall that had been built since 1986 without ever being renovated. And in this place, Eddie will work as a security guard. Vance took Eddie to the control room, which is their base, and in that room, Vance introduced Eddie to a man named Mason. Vance did it in a humorous way, but Mason didn't find it funny. The point is, Vance is a weirdo. Then came a drunken woman who was also part of their team, and her name's Ruby. She finished Mason's milk before going to sleep in her room. Vance explained to Eddie that they took 2 shifts over the 2 days. Maybe they really need the money or there is nothing else to do. On the other hand, the electrical voltage in the building was in trouble. Vance thought it was because of the storm. Vance prided himself on his taser gun, but it's a shame Eddie wasn't impressed by that. One other personnel named Johnny Wave was playing with her cell phone in the D zone of that mall. Then, Vance briefly showed Eddie a plan of this building that he thought looked like a gun drawn. And after that, he handed Eddie a uniform. Vance took Eddie around the mall and introduced each zone in it, from the shopping center, food court, to the competition arena. And finally, they arrived at Zone E, the second shopping center. Eddie was a little doubtful about the security procedures they had to do, because there were only 5 security guards there and they didn't have any weapons. Vance then told Eddie various things, such as about the motorcycle gang murders and thefts in this area. Vance also guessed that Eddie was a former soldier, but he didn't expect that Eddie held the rank of commander. Afterward, Vance told him about the safety procedures Eddie was in charge of, such as turning on the radio and not acting alone if anything looked suspicious. After Vance left, Eddie saw an advertisement photo depicting the joy of a family. He felt homesick for his family. Eddie then went around every corner of the mall and was not happy with the unstable electricity. After Eddie saw a display case full of grizzly masks, the electricity completely went out. When Vance was giving vitamins to Ruby at that time, Eddie heard a noise at the entrance. How surprised was Eddie when he saw a little girl pounding on the door with a scared face. It turned out that the little girl is Jamie, and her life is in danger. Then, Eddie called Vance while opening the door and leading Jamie into the mall. But suddenly the girl passed out, and Eddie wondered who was coming until Jamie freaked out. Eddie took Jamie to the control room. The security guards there were confused. Vance tried to call the police, but the phone line kept dropping. Johnny's cell phone signal also disappeared. From the CCTV camera, they saw a man wearing a coat approaching the mall entrance. Vance, Mason, and Eddie approached the man. The man's name was Charlie, and he claimed to be Jamie's father. But none of them believed this man. When Vance asked Johnny to take Jamie, Eddie stopped him. Eddie asked Charlie a lot of questions about Jamie, from her name, date of birth, eye color, to whether or not she had braces. And suddenly, Charlie fell silent. Jamie, who had woken up from her fainting spell, immediately screamed and jumped out of Johnny's arms when she saw Charlie's face. Vance and Eddie closed the door again so Charlie wouldn't go inside the building. And suddenly, they saw a strange man approaching the door, and he was carrying a big box. Charlie opened the box in front of them, and the box contained $1.2 million. Vance's eyes immediately widened at the sight of that much money, and he was almost tempted to comply with Charlie's request. If the security guards didn't hand over Jamie and take the money, Charlie threatened they would all be brutally killed. Vance, who couldn't take it anymore, was about to open the lock, but Eddie immediately acted. Charlie then met his troops and devised a strategy to surround the mall. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Eddie looked for Jamie in the mall. Hearing a sound behind him, Eddie found a ball rolling towards him. Eddie turned his back to the direction the ball was coming from, but then he was pointed at with a shotgun by Jamie from behind. Jamie asked Eddie for dry clothes, food, and refuge from Eddie. She didn't want to be treated like a child, but instead she took the promise with the little finger. Mason revealed what he knows about the case that Jamie is involved in. She dealt with the 666 criminal gang, where her accountant father was killed for defecting to the FBI, and Jamie witnesses the incident. Eddie was so sure that Charlie and his squad would return, he even gave a full analysis of the possible actions they would take. Suddenly, they saw a group of mercenaries walking in the parking lot. Eddie and Vance took Jamie to hide in a safe place. Eddie gave Jamie a flashlight, water, and a walkie-talkie that asked her to lock the door immediately. From the control room, Eddie and his friends saw 3 mercenaries approaching their car. Vance said that he kept a gun under his car seat, which made Mason panic. Of course, Mason was afraid and wanted to run away from that place. Vance gave Eddie the responsibility of tonight's security, because he knew that Eddie was an ex-Marine, and he's the right person to lead their action. Then, Eddie advised Mason not to run away if he wanted to survive. They tried to hold on until the FBI came. The security guards then installed electricity on the door, closed the rolling door with piles of sofas, and spilled oil on the floor. Then after that, they went upstairs. On the other hand, Charlie sent one of his men to run behind the car that had just crashed into the mall's entrance. The soldier took out a hammer and tried to climb onto the roof of the mall. Eddie and 2 of his colleagues threw a burning couch onto the car, causing the driver to get out and his body engulfed in flames. The 3 security guards then descended from the roof, and a fierce bald soldier chased them. Vance wanted to pick up his fallen walkie-talkie, but instead he was attacked by the soldier. Luckily, Ruby came to the rescue and knocked the mercenary down. Meanwhile, outside the building, Charlie's men clean up the mess in the parking lot. Vance and Ruby destroyed the CCTV monitors and uprooted the building plans. Eddie made a defense plan by making the mall their stronghold. Eddie taught Johnny how to send an SOS code with a flashlight. Instantly, Eddie was surprised to see Jamie come out of hiding, because Jamie didn't want to just stay silent. Meanwhile, Charlie and his mercenaries had made it into the mall. They entered the control room and tried to hack the surveillance camera. Charlie gave instructions to his men that no one should be allowed to live. Ruby stalked the mercenaries who was trying to enter through the iron door. One of them was electrocuted, but the bald soldier easily opened the door. Jamie drove a toy car with a remote control that had a camera attached. She was surprised that Charlie's squad took the toy car. Charlie saw the words Channel 47 on the paper taped to the toy. Charlie then opened the channel and spoke to Eddie. Via the radio channel, Charlie made a contest for his troops and the security guards that they will get $100,000 if they kill Jamie. On the other side, Charlie's squad had gone further into the building. Ruby tried to get in the way by getting them to shoot at a shop, while she shot one of them. The first attempt failed, and Ruby tried to set another trap. Charlie's men continued to advance and shot at Ruby and pushed her back. Because of that, she had to find a way to survive. Vance then threw a bomb filled with nails which hit one of the soldiers. Mason also managed to incapacitate a soldier by electrocuting him and shooting another who approached him. Eddie checked on his friends through the walkie-talkie. Everyone answered, but Mason started crying. Eddie immediately headed to Mason's location. He sneaked around and saw 2 soldiers in front of him. While trying to divert attention, he didn't notice another soldier coming from behind. Eddie then told Mason to get out of his place. At that time, a car on patrol approached the mall. Johnny tried to give a signal with his flashlight, but the flashlight was broken. He then tried to open the door even though Eddie had forbidden him. And because of that, Johnny was shot dead by a sniper. Eddie returned to his position and reported Johnny's death. Meanwhile, Vance and Ruby were trapped in the food court area, and Mason was cornered in a warehouse. Jamie offered help to see the number of enemies in the food court area with her toy car. And of course, the toy car was the prey of these mercenaries. Meanwhile, Eddie attacked them. It was an awesome solo action. Turned out that's what the oil spilled on the floor was for. But this is still not finished. Jamie's toy car was vandalized, and Jamie came out of hiding. On the other hand, Eddie still had to finish off one more enemy. After that, Vance and Ruby came out of their hiding place but were caught by the mercenaries. Ruby was shot, and she was led away by Vance. Eddie ran after the enemy and was nearly shot by Mason. They then entered a room protected by a steel rolling door. Charlie was furious to see how incompetent his men were. Vance was sad to see an unconscious Ruby, while Mason was still scared. Eddie gave Jamie a taser gun and a bag of dolls. Eddie and Jamie had a heart-to-heart talk. Jamie reminded Eddie of his daughter, Sylvia, who is far away. Jamie told Eddie that she was disappointed in her father for forbidding her to go to Uncle Will's house. But Eddie defended Jamie's father's decision. As a father, Eddie will also do the same thing. He didn't want to see his daughter get hurt. On the other hand, Charlie was still threatening Eddie. 2 hours had passed, but he still couldn't get Jamie. At that time, through the surveillance camera, Mason saw 2 police cars coming. Eddie tried to get rid of the van in the parking lot, because this van is the communications center for Charlie's squad. Meanwhile, Vance raised his gun and stood by the rolling door. Eddie let the cops in, while Vance was still fighting off the enemy and throwing Molotov bombs. He asked for help from Eddie, but there was no answer. Vance always shoots a gas canister which causes a massive explosion. The police asked Eddie to bring Jamie to the front. Mason, who was with the girl, was scared and couldn't run there. But Vance continued to motivate and reassure Mason. Vance's heroic spirit awakened because of that. But at that time, Eddie realized that there was something wrong with the police. Their shoes were wet, and they had tattoos near their ears. Eddie's intuition told him they were part of the mercenaries. Eddie stopped Jamie, but too late for Mason, who was showered with gunfire. Jamie then went into hiding. Eddie felt very sad because of Mason's death. Realizing that he was the only one left, Eddie hatched a new plan with Jamie. He asked Jamie to take the security's walkie-talkie to get a wider channel of communication so they could get help immediately. Charlie knew about Eddie's plan, but suddenly Eddie appeared and rode a motorbike very fast. Eddie was then chased by one of Charlie's men. Charlie chased after Jamie, and he closed his eyes as if he had a sixth sense to find that little girl. Charlie said that no one would be able to help him because apart from the long distance, the rain had also erased their tracks. Meanwhile, Eddie was still fighting his enemy. Eddie got back on his motorcycle to fend off enemy fire, then sped out of the mall to catch up with the van in the parking lot. Despite trying to move him, Eddie's actions were faster than his enemy. The tricycle hit the van. Jamie's walkie-talkie was broken by Charlie and Eddie was targeted by a sniper. Jamie communicated on a security walkie-talkie while being fired upon by Charlie. Eddie took the gun in Vance's car and fired it at the sniper. Charlie tried to intimidate Jamie with stories about his father who he hates. It turned out that Charlie had been abandoned by his father alone as a child, and he had very little money in his pocket. Charlie offered to keep Jamie out of action. Charlie offered Jamie to live with him. Jamie ran to another room. But Charlie still bullied the little girl over and over again. Shortly after that, Charlie managed to find Jamie and took him hostage. And along with that, Eddie came closer with wounds all over his body. Eddie relays the implicit message to Jamie. From a distance, there's a group of police coming when Eddie and Jamie step out of the mall. The police asked Eddie to raise his hands. Unexpectedly, Jamie then hugged Eddie. And it turned out, Vance was also still alive, even though he was badly wounded. He saluted Eddie as he was taken to the ambulance, proving that Vance admitted Eddie's greatness and Vance respected him very much. Eddie awakens from his sleep and he is in the hospital. Jamie was also by his side. Jamie thanks Eddie before returning to the witness protection program. She also said that Sylvia was very lucky to have a father like Eddie. Jamie was very surprised when she saw Uncle Will pick her up. She immediately ran and left Eddie, who was still pensive. Several days later, Eddie got off the bus carrying a large teddy bear. His arrival was greeted by his wife and daughter with a big smile. They then hugged and Eddie was very happy to be reunited with his family again. And this film ends with a happy ending.